New data from overseas shows imports into the U.S. are down since the tariff war started, while exports to other countries are quickly climbing.
This means major powers such as China and India are finding other markets for their products. Madeline Rivera has more from Washington.
The U.S. is facing rising consumer prices and supply chain problems. Americans are seeing increasing costs for food, energy, and housing.
In the first months of 2025, Washington's rhetoric of a self-reliant America free from foreign supply chains has already collided with economic reality. A sweeping executive order rolled back tariffs on critical imports such as nickel, graphite, and pharmaceuticals, underscoring the limits of domestic capacity. The reversal highlights a growing gap between political slogans and industrial realities, and nowhere is a tension more visible than in the auto sector. For car makers, whose supply chains span continents, the difference between survival and collapse now rests on how these exemptions are distributed. The policy shift is broad in scope. More than 4 to 5 categories of goods are being carved out from earlier tariff regimes, including industrial LEDs vital for clean energy, gold, pharmaceutical compounds, specialized magnets, and key minerals that power electric vehicles. The White House has admitted what industry insiders long knew: domestic output cannot shoulder modern demand. The exemptions, however, are not unconditional. They are bargaining chips offered only to trade partners willing to negotiate reciprocal terms. For automakers, this creates a precarious situation. Their survival depends not only on access to these resources, but also on the diplomatic moves of their home governments. Vehicles are among the most globalized products in existence. Thousands of parts cross multiple borders before a finished model arrives in a showroom. Every new Levi multiplies costs. In 2025, auto tariffs climbed to 25%, while duties on steel and aluminum surged to 50%. Analysts estimate that these measures alone will add $18 billion in extra expenses for U.S. automakers this year. On the consumer end, this translates into about $5,000 added to every domestically built vehicle and over $8,500 for imports.to shield buyers. Manufacturers have so far absorbed much of the pain. They cut into profits, reconfigured trims, and disguised fees rather than passing along the full increases. But such tactics are unsustainable. Margins are thin, and mounting costs will eventually force higher sticker prices. Luxury vehicles and electric cars, both heavily dependent on foreign components, are likely to show the sharpest increases first. Executives remain divided over whether exemptions will deliver lasting relief. Some view them as a temporary lifeline, while others warn that unpredictable swings in policy may be even more damaging than the tariffs themselves. The roots of America's reliance on imports are deep. The country consumes far more raw material than it produces, and the gap has only widened with the growth of advanced industries. Minerals, metals, and chemical compounds form the backbone of nearly every modern product, from cars and batteries to medical devices and electronics. The auto industry illustrates this dependency most clearly. Electric vehicles, celebrated as the future of transportation, require massive quantities of nickel and graphite. Yet in 2020, for the United States produced none of the 52,000 tons of natural graphite it consumed. Every ounce was imported. Compounding the vulnerability, more than 90% of global processing capacity sits in China. Even when graphite is mined elsewhere, it often passes through Chinese facilities before reaching American manufacturers. Nickel follows a similar trajectory. A single Michigan mine contributes modestly to domestic supply, and recycling adds a small cushion. But the majority comes from allies such as Canada and Australia, with most of the refining done abroad. Aluminum, gold, and other metals tell the same story. Imports from Brazil, Jamaica, and other producers fill the gaps left by limited U.S. capacity. These vulnerabilities translate into volatile costs and constant uncertainty for automakers. Policy tweaks may alter short-term numbers, but the underlying dependency remains. The executive order's conditions have sparked a flurry of international bargaining. Tariff breaks will flow only to nations prepared to offer concessions in return. The European Union and Japan moved quickly, striking deals that brought auto tariffs down to around 15%. South Korea soon followed, pledging new investments in American facilities in exchange for lighter duties. India, once penalized with a punishing 50% tariff over its oil ties to Russia, is pushing for reductions into the 10 to 15% range. Taiwan, facing a 20% levy, has also reported progress in negotiations. This evolving patchwork of trade agreements is reshaping the competitive field. Automakers from countries that secure favorable terms gain a critical advantage, while those left outside face steep penalties. The uneven landscape complicates long-term planning. Car production requires years of investment and design, but shifting tariffs inject unpredictable risks. Global auto trade becomes less about efficiency and cost, and more about diplomatic alignment and political bargaining. For consumers, these maneuverings are not distant abstractions. Every shift in tariffs or exemptions eventually lands in dealership lots in the form of higher prices, reduced model availability, or longer delivery times. Tariffs on metals and auto parts flow directly into the cost of new vehicles. With interest rates already elevating financing costs, the pressure on buyers is intensifying. If current trends continue, many models could soon slip beyond the reach of average households. The broader implications reach well beyond the auto industry. Pharmaceuticals, clean energy technologies, and electronics all depend on steady imports of specialized compounds and components. While the tariff rollback signal relief, they also underscore a sobering reality. America cannot currently produce the resources it consumes at the scale required. The administration's reversal reflects recognition of this fact, but also an attempt to turn necessity into leverage by tying exemptions to reciprocal trade. What emerges is a portrait of an economy caught between ambition and dependence. The vision of a self-sufficient America remained politically attractive, but industrial realities tell another story. Domestic capacity is insufficient, and efforts to shield industries with tariffs often backfire by raising costs for manufacturers and consumers alike. Exemptions may ease short-term pain, but they are transactional, unpredictable, and unevenly distributed. Automakers, perhaps more than any other sector, feel the consequences most directly, balancing on the thin line between survival and collapse. As 2025 unfolds, the United States faces a difficult balancing act. It must navigate between asserting independence and acknowledging interdependence, between protecting domestic industries and maintaining global competitiveness. The executive order rolling back tariffs may buy time, but it also highlights the fragility of supply chains and the high stakes of trade diplomacy. For industries tied to imported resources, survival will depend as much on foreign negotiations as on domestic innovation. And for American consumers, the price of that balancing act is likely to show up on the lot, stamped on the window of their next car. Automakers are scrambling for ways to weather the storm. Some are expanding production plants on U.S. soil, hoping to insulate themselves from volatile trade decisions. Others are experimenting with recycling strategies that could reduce reliance on imported metals. Many are seeking alternative suppliers to diversify sourcing. Yet all of these solutions take years to bear fruit. A supply chain built over decades cannot be reinvented overnight. In the meantime, consumers may discover that the badge on a hood carries new political meaning. A German sedan, a Japanese hybrid, or an American truck built with foreign parts may each reflect different tariff outcomes, making the final price as much a product of trade negotiations as engineering or design. To complicate matters further, new investigations under Section 232 are now targeting goods from polysilicon to wind turbines. The cloud of uncertainty hanging over the auto sector seems poised to grow heavy in the months ahead. The tariff reversal is not a reset button that erases the turbulence of the past year. Instead, it reframes a debate around an uncomfortable truth. American manufacturing depends on a steady flow of imported resources. Exemptions may offer temporary breathing room, but until domestic refining and production expand significantly, the foundation will remain fragile. Showrooms will increasingly divide along supply chain lines. Vehicles linked to privileged partners may stabilize, while those tied to penalized sources will carry more volatility in both price and availability. 3 factors will define the road forward, where critical parts are sourced, which trade deals are secured, and how fast domestic infrastructure can grow to close the gap. If those elements align, prices may cool and availability could improve. If they do not, trims will vanish from catalogs, waiting lists will reappear, and creeping costs will push more buyers out of the market. In this new environment, the brands that balance engineering excellence with diplomatic agility will emerge strongest. What happens next remains uncertain. Do these tariff shifts buy automakers the time they need, or are they merely delaying the inevitable? Will buyers accept higher prices, or will demand falter as the broader economy cools? And as Washington redraws the rules, will global partners remain aligned, or are trade wars about to shift into another gear? Meanwhile, in Russia, a different story unfolds. For over 2 decades, Vladimir Putin cultivated an image of permanence and strength, projecting the nation as a fortress immune to outside weakness. Oligarchs flaunted their wealth abroad, while oil and gas revenues poured billions into state coffers. The display instilled pride at home and caution abroad. Yet the image was always fragile. Today, the cracks are widening, and the unraveling can no longer be disguised across Russia. Daily life now carries a heavy weight of decline. Store shelves grow thinner, prices climb week after week, and the ruble loses value almost by the day. Families ration food, stretch wages up by less with every paycheck, and quietly endure shortages felt in both cities and small towns. Jobs vanish, incomes shrink in worth, and the promise of stability that once held society together drifts further out of reach. At the same time, billions of rubles are funneled into the war effort, leaving ordinary citizens with little more than silence in public and muted discontent in private. The toll is not only financial but profoundly human. The war consumes Russia's youth, pulling men from villages and cities onto the battlefield. Millions of others have fled abroad, either to avoid conscription or to escape an economy that suffocates ambition. The result is a nation losing people as quickly as it loses cash. Even government forecasts admit that by 2030 nearly 11 million workers will be missing from the labor force. Factories already struggle to keep production lines running, with shortages crippling entire sectors. Attempts to plug the gaps with migrant labor provide only a fraction of what is needed, leaving industries paralyzed. In this vacuum, Putin clings to energy exports, the foundation of his power for decades. Oil and gas once made Russia wealthy and gave it leverage over foreign capitals. But today that lifeline falters. Drone attacks have struck refineries, knocking out more than 13% of processing capacity and cutting deeply into output. Reserves are dwindling, while international buyers steadily reduce their dependence on Russian fuel. The country's very identity as an energy superpower is slipping away, along with the Kremlin's ability to command attention on the global stage. Yet the heaviest blow does not come only from sanctions or shrinking oil sales. It comes from the quiet retreat of the partner once expected to provide unwavering support. For years, China was portrayed as the economic shield against Western pressure, a vast market and financial lifeline that would prevent collapse. But now that partnership is weakening. Chinese banks, wary of secondary sanctions, are cutting ties. Transactions that once flowed easily are suddenly frozen, and deals collapse midway. Even regional banks in China are pulling back, a stunning reversal from earlier promises of limitless cooperation. What remains is stitched together through fragile workarounds, split transfers, obscure intermediaries, and covert payments that keep some trade alive but at higher cost and far greater risk.